I'm Mark Z, and you're watching Thorin, the best interviewer behind Travis Gafford.
Right, this is going to be the pilot, the first episode of a new show that I'm doing. And for this one, actually, I'll just be normally I try to be coy with what the title means, you know, and play around with it, etc. But this one's like fairly simple. There's nothing, no code behind it. So because I had to think up a name, right, Grabbz, and when you think up talk show names, part of the problem is you have to think up something that, there's a few rules I have, which a lot of people don't know is what you should do when you make shows is. You got to make it like a really easy thing to say so that someone could say it in conversation. Oh, I've listened to this show. Like if it's something that's like some really complicated thing to spell, like it's out already, it's got to be something that you can like easily Google. Like if you type it into Google, you know, there's not going to be a million things before you. It's going to, if you can, make it like vaguely related to the show that you're going to do or the region, you know, but don't go too far. Like I've personally always thought that it's a bit whack when every league thing's just like something to do with the game itself. Like people don't realize Summoning Insight, the reason why I picked that name is like the summoner part. It's not like I didn't call it Summoner Insight, even though every fucker used to just say that in the early days. Like I did make it like enough of a twist that it could have been a word on its own, you know. So along similar lines, since this is a show that's about EU as a region and Veteran is the co-host of it, and I have my own reputation, I just called it Elitists United because that stands for EU as an acronym, right? So perfect. Describe, you know, like we had a saying in English, Grabbz, about this particular company that made paint, or like I think it was like paint varnish or something, and the slogan they had was, because it was literally just like paint varnish, they used to just say it does exactly what it says on the tin. Like that was like the marketing slogan, you know. It's nothing special. Like, so if you want to listen to a few elitists talk about EU LCS, now LEC, then you're in the right place. If you're not, get the fuck out. That is literally the point of who we are. Like, you know, I'm sorry, this isn't one of those shows where I've got like the really popular co-host who's going to like give you I'll give you the sort of everyday version of that. Oh, I love all you guys, you fans. There'll be fan questions at the end. There'll be no fan questions at any point in time. If I even see a fan question on Reddit, I'll block you from ever watching the show. I can't do that, but I'm playing a character now. Don't worry about it. I can say whatever I want. So on those lines, Veteran, I've got one question to ask you as we begin on our quest of seeing how long the show can go for, what the flavour of it will be, etc. Will you be giving really long, some would say overly in-depth rants about almost every topic in which at times people try to jump in, but you're too busy still downloading your whole brain? Will that happen, do you think, at any time? Probably.
This is why we only have one guest, so I have less people to interrupt.
I can't lie, Veteran, you have nailed actually how I assembled this particular show. Like I did think, because you have to understand, right, on some of my other shows, sometimes I balance it like that, you know, like I pick one person, the other one. But sometimes you also message like a lot of people, and then if two of them say yes, you go, I'll do an episode of 4, you know, that's fine. I was already ready, like whoever said yes first, I was going to tell the other person, listen, I would love to have 2 guests, but the show isn't 4 hours long, so no, there's only going to be 1, sorry. This person said yes first, so... Along those lines, let's start the show. So here's the thing, right, Veteran? If we're going to live up to this name, right, there's 2 things we've got to do at the beginning of the show. So on my other shows, I might, you know, start with one of the other teams in the LEC. We'd work our way up, you know, we'd sort of break the ice a little bit. But what we're going to do is we're just going to immediately talk about G2, since Grabbz is here, and they're doing really well, so that covers the elitists part. And then part of being elitists is obviously shitting on other people. So right after that, we'll go straight into that juicy Fnatic topic. How about that, eh? Not bad? So let's start then. Since we've got Grabbz here, obviously, let's actually get some insight into the G2 team from someone who watches the game strategically. Like, I've heard all these great fucking anecdotes about, like, oh, you know, actually, Perkz wanted to play AD carry, which that's all great. That's straight fire promotion, but, like, that has nothing to do with whether the coach of the team thinks he can play AD carry and what his plans for him were and how they put the roster together. So, Grabbz, yeah. What was it like Ocelot's interview with me, where he makes it sound like one day, because obviously from the outside, right, people think that this was some genius move where it's like, how could we get both of the best mids at the same time? All right, one of them could switch to AD carry, but Ocelot made it sound like it was actually Perkz who came to him and was like, oh, I always play this anyway as my off roles. Like, I want to play it as a pro. Did you really just get informed one day like Perkz is now the AD carry?
Basically, yeah. I mean, Perkz never made it a secret that he likes AD carry and he thinks he can be really good there. So yeah, I mean, I think the moment he knew maybe Caps could be coming, he instantly was sold on the idea. And I never had any doubts about him because, again, he's mechanically very gifted and very driven in the game. So it was just a natural fit there.
And did you, like, what was, like, the order of all that stuff happening? Like, did you already know he was going to become AD carry, like, as soon as you heard that you'd get caps, etc.? Like, was actually getting Mikyx part of the concept of having Perkz be AD carry? Was that a total side move?
I wasn't actually that involved in the whole transferring business. I just knew changes will be made. And then basically one day I found out, okay, you have caps and Mikyx now. I'm like, sure, that sounds great.
Okay.
But yeah, again, like I knew from beforehand that Perkz was flirting with the idea of going AD. So that wasn't a surprise for me.
Okay.
But of course, the bombshell, we actually get caps and Mikyx.
So how do you adapt then to take someone who was your star mid laner and have them play as AD carry? Like, do you literally just treat him as though he's any other AD carry player? Have you tried to sort of make it a bit easier in the first few weeks? What's the mentality?
Funnily enough, like this guy, like Perkz, is his biggest critic. So before I can say anything, he's already in place TV and dissecting everything he's doing, right? There are some issues he has about how, as the AD carry, he has to place vision, which is different in the mid, of course. But it's learning very fast. And especially with Mikyx, he has somebody who's equally aggressive in lane as him. And they have the same idea how to play the game from bot. So that lets him focus actually less on laning because Mikyx helps him there and more about the stuff around that.
Okay. Right.
How's
go on.
How's communication working bot lane right now? Because Mikyx's traditionally being rather silent. Is that the same on G2? And Perkz, I was told, was vocal beforehand as a mid laner. Is he still quite vocal as a bot laner?
Pretty much, yeah.
So he's calling most of the plays around bot. Because a lot has happened around G2's bot lane in the early stages of the game as enemy teams are trying to abuse it more and more. Is all of that coming from Perkz, or is some of that coming from Jankos now?
No, it's mostly Perkz. In the past, in the old G2, we had issues about communication on bot lane. Yeah. Which was apparent the whole year, basically. Mm-hmm. Now with Perkz, though, we have a vocal player there who actually calls for Jankos if he needs them. And has information.
Wait, so Hyanon wasn't calling beforehand when it came to bot lane?
Like we had a lot of synergy issues between Jankos and bot lane. Mm-hmm. Just because I think the roles were different between Hyan and how he was in Rocket when I worked with him, now in G2. And I felt like in the year that he got run out by Perkz, like Perkz pushed him away from communication.
Yeah.
Because also Perkz is very, I don't want to say demanding, because when he talks though, he's very strong with his voice, let's say. I'm not sure I said in English, but it sounds like urgent and you want to help him, you know? If he says, I can commit now, you want to do it? But he doesn't mean it. He just says, okay, there's information, I can kill him if you come. And Hyan was more passive in how he talked, and therefore we often default to going mid. And that was a big issue in G2. And now with Perkz and Caps being in mid and bot respectively, we have more options to play around.
Okay. So you actually solved communication issues with this, as opposed to like just looking straight for like someone with a higher champ pool and the higher seed. You've actually fixed communication. That's interesting.
Yeah, pretty much.
Right, if we start out then, since obviously Perkz is going to be something we have to talk about here. The first week, obviously the team itself, we can all hear you, mate. The first week, you've won all the games, but we've already seen pretty good champ diversity out of Perkz in the bot lane. In fact, we also obviously saw the game where he just went and played Zoe. He played a mid lane champion, and we had almost a throwback to last year, except now we had two mids playing in a game instead of two top laners. So let's talk about this aspect. What did you think, veteran? Because I mean, I personally thought, like, I did tell people, like, to be fair, if you are laning with Mikyx, it's great fucking support to have to start out with if you don't want people to dive in your bot lane all the time. But I would have expected, you know, you spam one or two champions, you get comfortable gradually. What do you think of Perkz' debut as AD carry?
So initially, I thought that if it was ever going to work, if it worked with Mikyx, you basically had one of the best bot lanes in Europe by default. I figured that there was going to be some sort of ramp up time. I'm kind of surprised at some of Perkz' champion choice because I'm surprised he can play them. Like I know he can play Draven. There was even one time last year where he brought out the Draven mid in scrims versus Kasing once. So I know he can play. I know he can play these champs, but I would have assume that you guys would look to play way more around your solo lane strengths for now while Perkz gets used to the role or something. But what I did realize watching the game is that Perkz can do almost whatever he wants bot lane right now, because G2 is still very much a team that gets carried by their solo laners going into the late game if all else fails. You still have incredibly strong solo laners, and I'm not sure that I was ever one of the people who thought that Perkz gave like a much stronger performance than Caps. I thought Caps' level of competition last Worlds was a bit higher than Perkz' level of competition in the knockout stages. I don't buy into the whole idea that Zhao, for example, was ever the be-all and end-all of Chinese mids. I thought that was always Rookie, and both of you guys faced Rookie, so we have to disregard that in the playoffs and look at all the other mids. I thought so. It's very interesting to me how well it's working out, but also it's basically working out like it did beforehand. You know, like beforehand, the bot lane was never really the big focal point of G2. One big thing that's changed though is the champ choices, and despite the fact that he's playing really aggressive champions on the role that he hasn't technically played too much in the past, unless you count him playing AD carry from the funnel perspective as playing AD carry, it's working out much better than anyone would have thought. And it looks really good for your chances to make Worlds in this, because I don't think yours is a team that should have been spiking this well this early, to be honest. I thought it would take a lot longer than that.
Same actually. Just one thing I would disagree with, because I agree with you. Last year, we were heavy topside focus because of Perkz and Wonder.
Yeah.
It might look the same right now, but since basically every player can play every champion, and like it's a meme, but at the same time, I had drafts where I pick a champ and then 4 players tell me I can play it and I want to play it. I'm like, sure, but what is good for you, you know? That means we actually don't go into a draft and saying we want to play for that player, or we more dissect what champs we think are good. And that defines then the draft, because everybody in this team trusts each other to carry, given the resources. So we can't actually look at like champions just away from players and then say, okay, champion X is the best right now, we want to play that one. And then it doesn't matter who gets it in the end. So even though, as you said right now, it looked like a lot of pressure comes from our solo laners, one day maybe we just say, okay, this AD carry is the best right now, and therefore then Perkz has to carry. And we play
sure. I definitely didn't mean to imply that you guys were picking specifically to play around top side, though you do have to admit that right now you are playing a lot of champions, particularly in top lane, that have pretty free pressure. No one picks Karma thinking, yes, now all of our pressure is bot lane. You know, well, Karma top, by the way, for anyone who didn't watch the games. You guys are still picking the heavy pressure champions top, and you're picking champs for where he will have solo carry potential. CDX soul game, for example. I didn't even know you could play a Carly that way or that well until I saw that. You still, your solo laners, which were your primary function before, still can serve as a backup function now if you can't play around bot lane for whatever reason, if things do go wrong. So the Draven game, for example, he did end up falling behind due to pretty big plays by the enemy team that they were kind of counter plays to the bot side, but your solo laners were enough, and your solo laners are always in that kind of position to carry. It's not like we're seeing tank support tops and Galio mid perpetually or anything like that. Also, Jankos on Karthus is something that I guess I should have expected, but you know, you have teams like Misfits that are going like the Lee Sin and the Camille and all of this stuff, and the one time they go Karthus doesn't really go so well. But that being said, the clear speed of Karthus in this current iteration on 9.1 is so absolutely ridiculous. You can do basically everything on this champ.
Honestly,
I should have expected it.
Karthus was the biggest blessing because Jankos actually was really sick. And we tried champs like Camille the Scrim before, and it didn't go too well. Let's say.
Okay.
So when he said on stage, please just have you press R, he wasn't memeing. He actually was so sick. He was like, I'm farming and pressing R, and I rocked out.
Sure. Okay, that makes sense. But with that, you also have another backup option that you can pull the trigger on if all fails in the bot lane. So you could afford to be experimental with your bot lane, or you could stick with the bot lane you had last year, which arguably didn't have a very high ceiling. This bot lane, Mikyx and Perkz, clearly has one of the highest ceilings in Europe if it actually gets to work, and they're definitely in a good environment to improve as much as they can without damaging the rest of the team.
Thing is, just the thing you said, Grabbz, about like literally people all volunteering in the team. Like, yeah, I'll play that champion. Like, that's always been one of the things that no one says as like context for casual fans, but always killed me about League of Legends is when the teams I would see being praised as like their coach is amazing at drafting. I'm like, look at the fucking champion pools of some of these teams.
Yeah.
Like, you know, when you have some like RNG type team where in theory every player is like one of the top at their role, it's like, when you got a team like that, put it this way, what would be the pit holes for that guy? Like he's got so many options, hasn't he? Whereas the point is, if we contrast this with the team you had last year, you had all these areas where, okay, yeah, you were in theory drawing bans for the bot lane, but that was specifically because they had limited champion pools to some degree, right?
Yeah, I fully agree. And I mean, there's still this thought process in fans that the coach is solely responsible for draft, which is bull, because there are so many different matchups that if I go there and say I know every matchup from every role, I'm lying, right? Like at some point, I can give a framework and the players help me out. So of course, with being flexible in the draft, with my players playing everything, I can have like a better framework because I know no matter what will be picked, we can use this champion. There are also some issues though, because my players are so proficient that they tell me all the time, it's fine. Like I can play anything, it's fine. And that's the worst thing when I hear as a coach, because when I tell you, like 4 players tell me I want to play the champion and the matchup is fine and nobody can tell me this is good or not so good, then we're also stuck at the same players, right? So it's also like kind of cursed on some points. For example, the Excel game, the Wonder and Caps were still arguing about where Kali is going over second phase. I'm like, guys, come on, we don't have time anymore. So yeah, anybody wants to carry at some point.
Since earlier you said after Veteran gave his thoughts on the debut, like you kind of agreed in terms of like maybe you didn't expect to just instantly start winning because again with such a big roster move, I don't think anyone would have. I think even people who said that they thought Caps would be great as AD carry were like, oh maybe he'll take a few weeks to warm up, you know, like you know play it on stage is different than playing it in scrims. Is it shocking to just win all the first 4 games? I mean, obviously, you know, a couple were against low-level teams, but the first 2 obviously were teams that potentially were supposed to be playoff contention type teams.
Mm-hmm. It was surprising in a way because I thought Origen and Schalke will be really good, or like big contenders this year. So we kind of had like mixed feeling going into there. We knew we can win for sure. We just thought it will be a bit harder. I mean, it sounds really, really cocky, right? But if you look at the games, we never actually lost control. I mean, Origen early game when they got that with Draven was a bit iffy, but besides that, I think we just were the better team. And I didn't think the difference would be that high, especially in the beginning of the season. So definitely it was a surprise. A welcome one, but like this week, for example, wasn't surprising at all. We fully expected 2-0. Excel was really rough because we made many mistakes early game, but we shouldn't be losing to those teams if we play our game.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What were your actual expectations? Did you think they'd lose one of these games, Veteran?
I mean, I could add something regarding what we were losing.
Okay. I heard the question. You asked if I expected them G2 to lose all these games. So I don't really put too much stock in how like early starts for teams go, to be honest, in the split. Like if you cast your mind back to last year in spring, Giants and Vitality looked like they were the rank 1 and 2 teams at one point. Yeah, at one point we thought the final was going to be Giants versus Vitality. Look how that went. Summer split, you had Misfits go on the absolutely ridiculous streak. Look how that went. They didn't even make it to the World Championship. So I don't put too much heavy stock. So I was expecting SK to actually have a decent start, because traditionally speaking, these teams that you see having really strong early starts are teams that retain their rosters even if it was in Challengers Series. So the Vitality roster, for example, that had a really strong start. They retained their roster. You could somewhat expect that they would automatically have the synergy there. And SK Gaming had 3 out of 4 members. So then when they beat Fnatic, I was like, oh, okay, this is maybe a bit more than I expected. Then everyone started beating Fnatic, and it was a bit like, whew, okay, we're not completely wrong here. We're not completely wrong. The Origen stuff, I guess, is a little bit surprising, but they have definitely shown their potential. Like Miffy is clearly playing at a level he wasn't playing in North America. And currently the way that they are losing out is on dumb individual mistakes and dumb individual misplays and mispositionings, and even some greed in some instances. So I'm not too bothered by how Origen started off the split, because I absolutely do believe that they have every tool within that roster to fix all of these things. And I'm glad to see Miffy's level of play right now. always been like the king when it comes to the early to mid game transition, and he's got some fresh 3 games in a row. Morgana 1 game, and they have Lissandra, they have Camille, they have Sejuani. They always have champions that follow up on his calls in the early to mid transition phase very well, and it's so difficult to play against a team that can play that oppressively from the off when you're still developing somewhat. So I would expect that, but I wouldn't necessarily take Origen and Fnatic slumps now. And yes, Fnatic are having a Giga slump, but they've had pretty bad starts to splits before. Like even the old iteration of HGK beat Fnatic in the first week of Spring Split, for example. And if you cast your mind back to G2 on the Young Buck after they came off of the finals of MSI, they had a horrible first few weeks as well. But clearly Young Buck's been through that, Fnatic's been through that, and they know how to develop away from that and improve. So I don't put too much stock into the starts of splits. I don't really try to predict too much the starts of splits. And I've not really been too surprised by anything, except perhaps maybe how poorly Fnatic have ended up going. But some of that might be down to champ pool picks, because I don't think Nemesis is a Galio player. Nemesis was always someone you'd associate with Azir, with Ryze, with Kassadin, and with Corki, and basically outside of those 4, he wasn't really known for anything else. And Azir isn't really meta right now, though ironically you'd pick him into Galio. And the way he was playing Galio versus both Corki and Irelia showed that he's clearly not comfortable on the champion. It's actually insane how both those games were going. And a lot of people have lumped praise onto Nemesis for the Galio versus Irelia game versus Vitality, but he clearly had a poor understanding of the matchup anyway. And then when he was on Cassio, which is actually a champion that he has played in the past and performed on in the past, he did rather well. So I think they might have to do, as Grabbz say, draft is not like the be all and end all for coach. I actually think that their drafts were good in isolation, like in a vacuum. But for to tune Nemesis on that, he's much more, and then you'll see. I'm also a bit on priority. Though I know they did lose to Braum in the first week. It's not the same meta where you just go Braum and you dick level 1, which is what they were doing all last season, and they seem to think they can still do that this season. The game is not like that right now. That's not how you win the game right now. So. Right.
Actually, when he on the angle he was saying there about how he doesn't put too much stock in the early split, I have to say, having watched all the EU LCS splits, I have the same exact vibe about LCS, especially when it's best of ones. Because for me, it reminds me, actually, if anyone's an NFL fan, it's the exact same way in the NFL regular season. Like, it doesn't even matter if a team wins the first 9 games, because you have to play 16 games. If they start, like, dropping off heavily after they're 9-0, that team probably isn't going to win the Super Bowl. Like, that, because the idea is, even though it sounds in like if you think of like the Premier League or whatever, obviously it's brilliant to get loads of wins early because you just win the league. There's no playoff section. But because the playoffs is the ultimate thing, you want to be the team peaking going into the playoffs. So I've noticed that because it tends to be that, as you alluded to with when everyone started figuring out how to beat Fnatic, what happens is the teams are all trying to make adaptations week to week, and then as soon as a couple of teams beat the team that's on top, who was unbeatable, then all of a sudden more losses come. So I have to say, in the best of one era, I think people do go way too ham on like, oh, we're 3-0. It's like, that doesn't really matter, mate. Like, if the other team drop the odd game and then you drop a couple of games late in the season, it's even. Like, doesn't really mean that much. People put way too much stock in that. Way
Absolutely.
Too much. Like, put it this way, if you can start like that and go end to end, then yeah, you're an all-time great team. But there's very few teams that have even won the LCS have done that.
Yeah, Fnatic is basically the only one that I can think of. The
18-0
Fnatic
well,
split.
that time they went like...
Oh yeah, their summer split.
They started in the
yes, that was ridiculous.
Well.
That was
might
a
be
ridiculous
a couple of the
one.
only cases ever, though. You know, otherwise there was always up, and in fact, it nearly always was, as cliche as it sounds. The team that's super hot at the beginning were the ones that cool off, and then the team that ends up winning is the teams that, you know, like as the last third, they just go super ham and they have the winning streak. They go into the playoffs. What do you think, Grabbz? Like, I mean, this is one of the other things that's tough about coaching, right? Is you want to coach week to week, but you're trying to also pace people for the season and not get too crazy over losses.
Yeah, it's also that if you keep winning, it's hard to fix bad habits because players get into the mindset it works. So why would I change anything?
That's true.
So often you fall into a trap if you win many games. And we had the same in Summer Split, right? Where until Rift Rivals, we were also winning every game. You kind of feel yourself on a pedestal, and then it's really hard to have the discipline to question yourself if you know you're winning all the games. So therefore, I agree with you guys that, I mean, 18-0 is a nice storyline, but in the end, it won't matter, right? You can go 18-0 and then lose the games, and then you're still not an MSI, and nobody will care about your season. So in the end, again, with this team, though, what I have right now, they all agree and we all know we're not training to beat Rogue, Axel, Vitality, Misfits, right? We're training to beat the Griffins, the IGs, which will be coming later on if we actually reach those places, right?
Sure.
So that's an easy way for me to fix this mindset. But yeah, again, especially best of one scenario. If you look at our style, we're playing very aggressive. That means there's no way it will not blow up one game, at least one game. Axel almost happened.
Of course, yeah.
So
the best of one. I mean,
yes,
you figure it's going to happen eventually. You know, the mad thing is, actually, I'm just realizing here, to fulfill the short title of being elitists and being from Europe, is, you know, in the past, right, when you said that answer there, which is totally reasonable for a coach, by the way, like, you know, I'm training to try and beat, and then you listed the teams that at the moment people consider the de facto number one in the world. You've got Griffins stomping everyone in Korea, IG still considered the top dogs in China. Well, the irony of that, right, is in the past, everyone would try and meme on that, right? Like obviously, if Reginald ever dared to say, like, you know, we're training to beat SK Telecom a couple of years ago, every Reddit thread would be like, haha, what an idiot, you know, get out of fucking groups first or whatever. But, like, to be fair, the world's changed, Grabbz. Like, if everyone goes, don't be realistic, you're like, listen, bitch, you remember RNG? Remember that team that was going to win everything? Yeah. Anyway, calm down. Everyone just calm down. No one knows what can happen at these worlds, baby. No one knows. No one knows.
That was a
bad resume.
That was so fun, actually. That was such a fun day when G2 beat RNG, because I was still living in the gaming house with Richard and Kelsey. And Kelsey obviously really wanted RNG to win.
Good to know, actually. Good to know. I'm going to write it.
It was the funniest thing in the world, actually. Holy God.
Okay.
I can tell you.
Because I woke... Okay, I'm not going to lie. After the first game, I woke up to see that it was... Yeah, I woke up to see it was game 4. And then I saw it was game 5. I was like, oh my God. And then when the 2v2 kills happened, I just kept screaming as loud as I possibly could so Kelsey could definitely hear.
I think that's why she now lives in North America again, man. And is in the academy at the
story time.
Yeah,
game 5, the first gank on bot, was one of the handful of times during the whole year that bot aggressively called for a gank early. And
oh my God.
No, but in the sense that they were not playing for ganks, right? They were playing differently. But this time they actually wanted the gank, and Jengos was kind of surprised in game, like, oh, sure, I'm going bot then. And it worked out. So yeah, it was a fun ride. And I can tell you, nothing is more threatening than being game 5 and you see Uzi and Sivir getting the items, and you're like, oh no. Oh no, he's 3 items. Oh no, he's 4 items. Like, oh my God, this guy.
They looked at that and they saw tenure. Like, you do that, you should be set for life with jobs, and then Hyunan's absolutely nowhere, so who knows what happened there. But I'd call for ganks if I saw it was possible. I'm about to beat the best bot lane in the world, as I was apparently supposed.
But I mean, he's cutting out right now.
Yeah,
but
just keep going.
There was also the change of mindset during the series about how we approach bot, because in the beginning it was like we picked, I think, Rakan, and I'm really bad at memory about those kind of things, actually. We had Rakan and Lucian. They had Lucian Leona against Rakan Varus, I think. So it was more about, okay, scaling bot lane, and then hopefully they will use later on and play the top side. And in those games, we kind of changed it around. It's like, actually, let's pressure Uzi. Let's go for bot lane. So yeah, and then bot actually also made something out of it, right? They actually called for it aggressively, and they did the job. So yeah, I mean, it was a great day for sure.
Right, before we talk about the other teams and upset people, meme, all the rest of the things that naturally come out of talking about teams that aren't your own, I do have one last question, which we have to ask, which is, what is it like to have Caps as your mid laner?
It explains a lot about Fnatic in summer. That's how I felt against Axel, because we should have lost that game by our reason. Like, we entered so hard in the early game, we should have lost. But then there's Caps, and he pulls the win out of somewhere the sun doesn't shine. And I'm like, that's how it feels like. Because I remember games in summer where Fnatic again was behind or something, and they were on the cusp of losing. And then suddenly that guy pops off and wins the game alone, right? Also, I think people get the wrong idea of him, because in mic checks and background series, he's always very happy-go-lucky and seems kind of crazy and over smiling, laughing, not too serious. But he actually has a serious side to him, and he actually is able to communicate in a how do I say it in English? In objective manner, right?
Right.
So it's not always like this on joking around only in.
What you say there actually is something a bit strange. I know it's because people do it with everyone, right? Like when they're trying to learn a person's personality and they've only heard a little bit, they will make that like the person's whole personality, and as a result, you get these like caricatures of people almost drawn. But obviously, with Caps, as you're saying, how the mic checks were included with the fact that he just left Fnatic like that. A lot of people thought, oh right, is he just someone who kind of he's not serious about the game, he plays for fun and he just doesn't, almost like ambivalent to whether this is a big match or not. But that's just how he is in terms of like joking around outside of the game.
Like out of the game, of course, all 5 of them, like I'm going crazy. They're all, I don't want to say the M-word monkeys, I did know, but yeah. They talk nonstop. They do bad puns all the time. They joke around, but in the game, they all come down a bit, at least communication-wise, and especially Caps. It was really surprising to me in the first week of LCS, where I think how was the communication like against the Origen game? 90 minutes in, I think we just killed them. Everybody was like already like joking, this game is won, and they just hear Caps like in a extremely serious tone, like, okay, yeah, shut the fuck up, set up for Baron, and the team is like, all right then. So that's something you would never expect of Caps if you only know him from mic check, right? So I was surprised too, but it's like really nice to work with him, and same for the other 4 guys.
The thing is, when you say that though about the fact that like all of them are just talking all the time, etc., that just reminds me of when Jankos first joined G2, and I remember the first mic checks they were doing. Right, he was just it was just him talking all the time, and I was thinking, oh, maybe he's just doing it, to like get to know his teammates, like break the ice. But obviously, it just never ended. I remember like one of the early ones, right? He was just the whole time on the mic, like, "Hey guys, I'm going to go to the tablet," just doing that the whole time. I remember there was just a bit where like Perkz was just looking over, because obviously he's just come from playing with a Korean jungler like Trick, who I'm sure was just like minimal communication. Just looking over like, what the fuck have I signed up for here? Like, this guy never stops talking. It's not so lucky, we're in LCS.
Yep, and it's the same out of the game. Like, those guys don't stop talking legit at all. Right. But they all fit together, at least. That's something.
Right, okay, let's then talk about, because the sad thing is, if Fnatic had succeeded, we obviously would have also talked about them at the beginning of the episode anyway, because they were supposed to be the 2 teams that everyone was excited for. Couple of others as well, but the big legacy teams that are supposed to dominate this league. But obviously Fnatic has not done that. They've started terribly. Everything's going wrong. Where do we start, veteran? Where's Fnatic gone?
Oh, okay. So I've obviously mentioned already the Nemesis champion. Yeah. So I don't think Nemesis is a bad player. I did say that I thought Humanoid was like the best out of the 3 new rookie mids. The reason why I definitely put him above Nemesis is that Nemesis didn't really develop his champ pool away from like 4 core champions around when he was playing in Mad Lions. And all of these champions helped him get pressure and play with Selfmade Man really well. And anybody who tried to get Nemesis between spring and summer last year was met with the declaration that he wouldn't join without Selfmade. And if you try to get Selfmade, you got a very similar thing about Nemesis. Like they were absolutely a package deal. Though obviously if Fnatic comes calling, you don't really say no. Galio is definitely not one of these champs. It does seem like it should fit his repertoire. But he's typically been playing these ranged mage champions that can be pretty consistent lane bullies. And the way he was trying to play Galio versus Corki in the first few levels kind of showed that he wasn't quite aware of the difference in playstyle when it comes to playing a Galio. He shouldn't be behind on pressure versus a Corki in the early game. Corki used to be a really strong counter into Galio, and maybe Grabbz has a different understanding of this matchup right now than I do. But at point 1 state at the very least, that you get pressure over early matchup, able to hit back, trade destroyed by comfortable enough to do it, even when he had jungle hovering nearby. So he seemed quite clearly uncomfortable in this champion. I don't know how much of this is nerves from being on Fnatic in the first week, how much of this is just because he's never really attempted to expand his champion pool in a year. Whereas Humanoid, in the past few years, has expanded his champ pool from being an Azir Z2 Trick, which, by the way, are 2 champions which are very good to start with, because they're pretty goddamn different play styles. And this automatically opened him up to having a much wider and more diverse champ pool. He basically plays anything at this point. So you have a really strong level of progress with him, even though he was restricted to playing in some pretty poor leagues. Now a bunch of Czech people are going to get really angry at me for saying this, but he was basically 1v9ing on teams with Diamond 1 players and was coming out pretty strong in EU Masters despite all of this, and it never stunted his development. Whereas Nemesis was on one of the best teams, and it did somewhat seem to stunt his development. There's always be humanoid above Nemesis, and I would expect Nemesis to require you to play a bit more towards his comforts, at least initially. I'm not saying he's on the Scarlet Red Hands tier, if anyone remembers who Scarlet is, of he's never going to adapt away from this champ pool kind of deal, where that guy only plays Cassio, Vladimir, Kassadin, Vel'Koz, and that's basically it, and I can guarantee it's going to be a similar thing in North America right now. But he's definitely a player that you're going to have to ease in a bit more early on. And then I don't know what's happening with the bot lane of Fnatic, but I do know that Braum isn't the be end or pick that it was last split. And last season even. And last season, Fnatic were very much long level 1 champions, led by the Braum from Hylissang and doing really clear. And this is a huge issue because the playstyle that Fnatic had last season, which they're not even able to vaguely copy right now, is that they would just get priority bot, they'd get some really good level 1s off, and they would unlock Hylissang to roam towards mid and play with the mid laner. Nemesis isn't even on champions that allow for that right now. It's almost entirely the opposite way that you would want to play with the Galley. You'd want to play from mid towards another side lane. So they've changed up their place on that, but they haven't changed up their early level 1 focus shows that they haven't really gotten a huge grasp of how the game has changed since they were playing last season. So there are multiple factors there. That plus there are a lot of teams now with supports that can actually contest Hylissang. So Schalke, for example, Ignar does what Hylissang was doing last season, and he's always done so, and he's doing it on picks that are much stronger in the meta right now. Fresh has actually made a legitimate comeback. So it's a prisoner against teams like SK Gaming. And I know it's weird to say that they're coming in with a lot more synergy, but it seems that trying to play without caps, and Grabbz already mentioned that he understands a lot more about Fnatic last season now, is a pretty big deal. It seems you can play basically anything and get away with it if you have caps on your team, judging by that Excel game. So they need to get used to playing with other objectives in mind, but they haven't even updated their picks for that. And seeing them go to the Cassio was pretty good. But I obviously can't speak to what's happening internally, so I can only speak to what I'm seeing in game right now. And this is the weird dichotomy that I'm seeing that's holding them back. I have every confidence that they'll make it back, though. Young Bucks being in situations before where his teams haven't had such a strong start, even if they've come off of the strong tournament. And from what I understand, talking to players, this guy very much focuses on the fundament of the game when he's coaching. His teams will always be on kind of a delayed times, doing level 2 bonanzas early on, that just really strong, cheesy ways to play the game and get early season victories. Young Bucks teams will always come in strong towards the end when it matters, because he's not interested in teaching them these kind of cheesy concepts. That does seem a bit weird given how they were playing level 1s out, but I if anyone's going to figure this out or help them figure it out as a team, it's going to be Young Buck.
Okay. Right, Grabbz. Obviously, one of the areas that I'm very interested to know your opinion here is not just what do you think of Nemesis, this new recruit to Fnatic, but the part that is both unfair and fair about judging Fnatic harshly is, on the one hand, they did keep 4 of the players that were in that Worlds final. In theory, they shouldn't have been a team that needed the big ramp-up time, because they're not making an entirely new roster like Misfits is. But then on the other hand, as we've alluded to, it's not like there is a replacement for caps. So did the way Fnatic use caps means they have that Nemesis is going to have to play a different way? Is there some sort of big adaptation they're going to have to make away from whatever gave them the past success? What do you think?
I want to add something to what Veteran said, that in the past played from bot to mid, or make Hylissang be out from to mid, right? But these kind of plays are born by mid lane's communication and setup. Mm-hmm. That means the mid lane has to tell Hylissang, okay, on this wave we can go, because I have the wave in a way that we could actually gank. And of course I don't know Nemesis, I'm not sure how vocal he is, but seeing how he plays without Broxar, basically, the mid's jungle synergy is non-existent in most parts. I also think he's not doing the same with Hillsong. That means he's not utilizing them the same way Caps did. And that kind of pushes them towards playing the Gaio thing, where hopefully at some point they go to bot. But then again, League evolved away from mid laners being the superstars alone. Like, it's always 2v2 mid jungle, always. Mm-hmm. You can't lane alone if your jungle's on the ground. And if the synergy is not there, and Brox has seemed off the last 2 weeks, and I'm sure he will bounce back, but that also makes Nemesis look bad. I mean, in the Corki matchup, I agree with the veteran. It was very apparent. But for example, Galio is said to be good in Terraria, but it's also a 2v2 thing, right? It's not Galio should stomp a 1-on-1. It's more Galio can set up the jungle to come, and if they don't utilize that, then of course Nemesis is not going to look as good. So again, I don't know too much internally about Fnatic, but I think Caps left it, like, of course, mechanically a gap, but possibly also in communication, which will be something that Youngbuck has to focus on. But that's something that I also have high faith in them to actually ease out towards the end of the split.
Okay. Right. Obviously, it's funny you mention it, Veteran, because like there have obviously been some people who've been going hard on Nemesis because he's the new guy and they've lost all the games. But I actually think, like, if you add it all up, subtract like the people giving praise or giving the person who seems like they're taking it the hardest is Reckless. Like, it sounds like everyone's going in on Reckless after most of these games, which of course then provoked. Like, people don't realise you can never be on Forgiven's side. If you all just say Reckless is shit, he's going to tell you why he's good, isn't he? That's the whole, it's Forgiven's personality. What did you expect? Like, so come on, Veteran. Are people being, has Reckless started the season badly? Like, is he out of shape in AD carry? Does he have a limited champion pool?
I don't buy that Reckless has limited champion pool. I don't buy that he has limited playstyle either. He's made dramatic changes in his playstyle since season 4, when he very much was the last hit in teamfights, by the way, King, and not exactly the
He was good at doing that.
damage
People don't realise, yeah. And I was never shitting on him for that. I was just saying you can't be the best AD carry if that's your job. Come on. That's like in Moscow 5, no one called fucking Genja the best player. Yeah, he could last hit champions as well, mate. Like, you know, people always went way too hard with him. But you're right, yes, obviously he's evolved since then a lot.
I think the reason that people are going really hard on Reckless is a combination of, first, the fact that he went fucking like 0-8 or something ridiculous like that versus Schalke, and the fact that he said that they babied Caps essentially, whereas I think the symbiosis is very much closer to what Grabbz is indicating, and Grabbz actually now has first-hand experience of Caps, so you could actually confirm if Caps is indeed that vocal in the mid lane, then they have in fact lost like a leading force that enabled them to make all of these kinds of plays towards mid. You definitely aren't going to be able to do that if you don't have that kind of communication center. And I'm not trying to like rag on Nemesis or blame Nemesis at all for it, but the whole dichotomy of Fnatic that has changed dramatically because of Nemesis's addition. And it's probably more accurate to say because of the loss of so you're confirming basically that Caps is actually pretty vocal in mid lane, right?
Yeah, he is, for sure.
Okay, so I know that Selfmade was basically leading the duo on Mad Lions, and you can actually see the way that he's parving right now. He's basically had only one bad game in terms of parving from what I've seen, and the rest he's actually played pretty exceptionally in the early game. And he's still, because they're still retaining that level of control around their mid jungle from the communication perspective, they're able to utilize someone like Pyrion, who's obviously going to have communication issues. Selfmade Man has basically already played with a mid who might not know English. So I think the hate on Reckless misses the wider point of why Fnatic is doing badly. I think Reckless had one bad game that everybody is obviously going to jump in on, and I think Reckless made the poor decision of ragging on everyone today. Even though he has specific champion preferences, he doesn't have a champion pool issue. He's never really had one of those. Obviously, when Tristana is meta, he wants to pick Tristana non-stop. When he picked Sivir into good matchups in this weekend. They haven't actually suffered for picking matchups because of Reckless champion pool yet. So I think anyone who's trying to rag on Reckless champion pool is missing both the wider picture and doesn't actually understand what they're talking about in the first place.
Okay. Right, Grabbz, do you want to talk about Reckless? Do you want to talk about other players in the team? Because obviously, like I say, we're bringing back all the players. We can look anywhere in the team for flaws here. I mean, obviously, they hoped in a world where Soaz leaves that Bwipo is going to be amazing. That's another thing you hope continues from last year. So where do you see the problems of Fnatic? What would you identify?
Of course, what I'm saying is all speculation, right? But I got strong vibes from their interview thing 1 hour with Fnatic, that they really early feel untouchable already. That makes it even harder in the beginning of the season to get to bad habits and remove them, right? Because what I said earlier, if you're winning all the time and now Fnatic won both splits, they were world's finalists, of course they will feel like they know how everything works. And then smaller mistakes are not getting looked at. So I think that's a huge factor as well. Confidence is never bad, of course, but at some point it can be too much. Besides that, I mean, again, Fnatic bot lane was never actually, like, they're good, but they're never insane to be 2 bot lane, right? They're not going to be the in-your-face 24/7 killing you. And now, since the focus is a bit away from enemy teams around mid lane, it's also more apparent on bot that they can't just safely farm up anymore. They will have more pressure against them. But again, I mean, I don't know how Nemesis talks, but if Veteran says that Selfmade Man was the more vocal one, then I can see why synergy is missing, because then the calls, of course, are missing, but that's something you can teach very easily. Well, not easily, but over time. I mean, it depends on the player, right? I think there's Nemesis that they will know how he works, so I don't think they took a guy who never talks. So I think there will be a way to get him in.
I hope so, yeah. I've never heard Mad Lion's communications for myself, but I have talked to their players. So I have an idea of how it actually works within the team, and they've told me as such. But I do have to say, I don't actually think you can teach a player who isn't vocal to be vocal. You can teach a vocal player what to say, but trying to get someone whose personality just isn't there, you're not going to give them like a personality change. You know, there are some people who are in-game leaders, and there are some people at this age, at the very least, who aren't. And it's one of the most difficult things to change, I think.
I mean, what you can do though is give them checklists, right? At a certain point, you're required to say this one, so you can help them out with structure. And I think that's the important part. For example, Mbako Nemesis, okay, if you pull the wave, talk to Hylissang, because then you can roam, because then you can gank, right? That's something you can easily do. Of course, he won't be the shot caller anytime soon.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would actually love to hear from the next communication, because again, I know Caps now, and he's very vocal. Leading from top lane is hard. So even if Beepo is vocal, he can only lead for his own lane in the early game, and he can't influence bot that much, right? So I don't know how communicative Brox are, Reckless, and Hylissang. So maybe that's also an issue for them, that they have no clear direction in the early game and nobody's willing to take the lead on. So again, everything is speculative, but actually I want to check. For example, the Silver game, right? They had fresh into Braum Schalke. So Fnatic is supposed to get pressured in. Hilly roamed on bad timings, and then Reckless got cut out. Of course, he looks bad, right? But yeah, as you said, there are many factors to why people don't perform well. And you can't just pinpoint, and especially the champion pool issue thing is a meme. That just really doesn't fit Reckless.
Yeah, I think they had good matchups. So even if you thought Reckless had champ pool issues, I wouldn't understand why you would actually bring that up at this point. It's not like it was affecting them.
Yeah, I agree.
So obviously, as you alluded to already, Veteran, like a lot of this isn't even just on the players and the coaching staff, etc. People want to see what Young Bucks' impact will be upon the team, because with this such a terrible start, it's one thing if someone loses and you can sort of see that they're just like, we only lost by a bit, we'll get them next time in the next game. Fnatic have taken these losses so hard. I don't know that I've ever seen a team that was a top team lose and look like this wrecked. Like you've seen all the stuff where they're just not present for social media. They've turned down interviews. Like they look as though, it's like you said, Grabbz, they came in thinking that they were going to be the kings, and it's the nightmare start. Everything's gone absolutely wrong. And obviously some of these games are ones they probably had on the schedule, like checked off in their mind. Like, right, we'll get that one. Like, let's focus on this big one here. What do you think about the difficulty of making a turnaround at this point in time? Like if they get their in-game stuff together, do they just start winning? Is there something to overcome here? What do you think?
I mean, for a competent coach, it's very easy actually, because again, you take the focus away from the end result and you just let the team focus on what actually happened in the game, and step by step lead into the actual things they should be doing. So, of course, if you just focus on actual losing and you don't make an effort to teach them why they actually lost and what the important parts were, then of course it's hard to turn around. But I think you have 4 players who were Worlds finalists. They had rough times in their life. I mean, the loss itself in the final. I mean, I know how wrecked we were after losing to IG, so I can only imagine how they felt, right? So compared to that, this will be nothing. This will be legit nothing to them, and I mean, again, I have no worry that they will bounce back.
Yeah.
What about this? And this is for both of you. So next week they play Rogue, who's been one of the worst teams. They also do play Misfits, who obviously is a big revenge game because Swaz is there, and it's also considered one of the better rosters. So if you look at that, already there's a chance they lose the Misfits game. If they lose the Rogue game as well, if they start off at that position, even if they win the one game, you know, they're still going to have a terrible record. What do you think happens next week, depending on whether they win or lose? Like, you can't call a team this early in the season. There are 9 weeks, but if you've got that record after 3 weeks, it's starting to get rough at that point.
Where do you want to go first, or? I mean, only going by the competitive aspect, being 0-6, it's really hard to come into playoffs. Like, that ship has almost sailed, especially now with the new format. Like, having the bar is immense, and then them having to fight back towards the finals will be really hard for them. Especially since the teams which are above them, like for example us, Vitality, Misfits, you can't expect them to lose that many games. So even technically, if they win every game, they're not guaranteed afterwards to be in playoffs. Maybe they are mathematically with 0-6. I mean, but you know what I mean, right? But the more worrying for me would be that, I mean, of course, you get to know some players, even if you don't play with them. I think the atmosphere in the team will be like really heated. With the kind of players they have, and I think that's really dangerous then to come back from. Because of course everything is easy if you love each other, but if you lose and then you have people in there who make the atmosphere even worse, then it's really hard to work with each other. So I think that's the big worry for me in terms of Fnatic, that they don't have the argument culture. I mean, in German it's called Streitkultur, argument culture basically, where you know how to argue with each other and you respect each other. If that's missing and then they start losing and keep losing, then it will be really hard to bounce back,
Okay. What do you think, Veteran?
I think only one team has ever come back from that kind of deficit, and having been on that team, I can tell you that it is ridiculously, absurdly hard to come back from that kind of deficit. But it's kind of like what Grabbz was hinting at. The fact that YoungBuck's approach is a fundamental approach where he's actually forcing you to see what you did on a fundamental level wrong in that game, as opposed to like going over team fights, going over mechanical misplays, or thinking you didn't do it's a purely on the basis of like your level 1 cheese strat didn't go so well. Because he has this approach, his teams have often started with deficits, and this isn't the first time he has had one. And if anyone's going to come back from it and make their team peak later on in the split, it's definitely going to be him. But if they do lose to Rogue, then we do have to start asking some bigger questions, because I think everyone and their mums was predicting Rogue would be the last place team. They are the last place team right now. They're doing really horribly, and they don't have the kind of prestige on their roster that you would expect to make a bounce back at this point in time. Fnatic have all of the tools in their yard to do that sort of thing. And I know it's still technically early on, but you have to be getting at least enough right that you can beat a team like Rogue. If they're not at least 1-5 at this point, then I'm going to... I wouldn't say you raise the alarm bells at this point, but there's definitely something else going on behind the scenes that we're not necessarily privy to. And on that note, their hardest battles are still ahead of them, because it's not just Misfits. They still have to play a swath of other top teams after that.
Yeah, G2's are a week after, I believe, so it doesn't get any easy. Well, this is the problem.
It's getting harder for them.
If you throw your games against SK and some of these other teams, well, those are the games you had to win. You know, if you're not going to win those ones, you're not going to beat G2, probably, most likely. Right, okay, then let's move to one of the other big teams, which is the other one that, in terms of the off-season roster I alluded to earlier, looked very strong, was Misfits, obviously. What do you make, Veteran, the new Misfits lineup?
So, so I already said on Listen Loco that I think the problem with this Misfits lineup is it doesn't address any of the issues that any of the old Misfits lineup had, which is that after the early to mid-game point, they actually lack either decisive shot calling, or they lack the appropriate late-game shot calling or mid to late-game shot calling that you really need to close out games past a certain point. So the last Misfits Boston Summer split is the most obvious, absolute epitome of this, where they were stomping in a meta where you won at 20 minutes, or when that was gone, they couldn't even make it to the World Championships. They couldn't even make an impact in the playoffs. It was an entirely meta-dependent team, and I still think that the roster they have right now doesn't address any of those issues, because I'm not really on like this. I don't have the same idea of Gorilla that a lot of people appear to have, though it was based on things that I cited on the Listen Loco episode, like so Grabbz, you probably didn't watch it because who watches Listen Loco, but way back on that show, I said that in season 5, when I was going to apply for the Fnatic analyst position, obviously before I got the HUK position offered to me, they wanted you to do like a breakdown scouting report of the semi-finals matchup, and I wanted to make the argument that you had to just ban out Prey if you wanted a good chance to beat Rox, because Prey was only playing Kalista, Varus, Ashe at the time, basically just champions that could engage, because they didn't have a strong primary engager when Gorilla was on engage supports. And that's stuff like the Alistar, for example, that people will always insist to me that he is incredibly strong on. And he can be strong on the Alistar, but it's not for the reasons that Ignar is strong on the Alistar or on the Thresh, on the Morgana, or anything like this. Ignar is that type of player. But that's something he's really strong at the early to mid transition. Gorilla's not even strong at it at that point. And way back then, I went through every single engage that Gorilla did, and I found out that it was literally like less than 30% of his engages were ever actually successful, or ever got anything other than his team basically all dying. Whereas when Prey was engaging, it literally shot up to like 80%. And since then, by the way, since that episode, Team Liquid's analyst and Fnatic's former analyst, Kays, actually messaged me and said that my data from back in season 5 corroborated exactly with the data that he took on Gorilla as recently as the last off-season, because they were obviously looking at a lot of support players. This was a big aspect that they looked at. This is still the statistical tendency of his. Because they don't have any answers to this, they're still in a position where after a certain point, they just don't know what to do. And the way that they got around this in Spring Split last year was that they had Shen on their team in some capacity, either top or support, because they have Mikyx and that guy can play anything. And then Maxwell could do as many autistic engages as he wanted, and they would work out. And then we banned Shen, we beat them, and this was back when we were doing horrible. And after that, everyone started banning Shen, and the secret was out, and then they couldn't win anymore because Shen was off of the table, and they couldn't win anymore until it was a meta where it was a 20-minute FF game, and then once that was gone, they couldn't win anymore again. There aren't really that many options in the meta right now, but the meta is pretty early game focused. It's a very burst heavy meta that you can snowball upon really easily. But in their one loss to Vitality, you still saw this sort of headless chicken nonsense when push comes to shove and they actually have to play grouped engages. They didn't know what to do versus Vitality. Even though they had all the tempo to choose what to do with, there isn't anyone on that team outside of Soaz who actually comfortably understands how to play that part of the game. And Soaz isn't in a meta right now where he can just pick engage heavy top laners. So the Kennen was a really strong option for them, but the Aatrox was not as strong of an option for them for Soaz to be able to take command at this point. And there was a really famous split that Fnatic had before they went to the World Championships and lost to RNG, where if Soaz was on Gnar Jarvan, they would win the game, but if he wasn't on Gnar or Jarvan, they would lose the game. And it's precisely because Soaz was the one who knew how to set up the flanks with tempo to actually engage and get his team ahead. They're in the situation now where Soaz can't get those champions, and they are still suffering from that. And I know this is all based off the one game, but Misfits are right now like the early game team. They're even more successful early game than G2 are, statistically speaking, by the way. They have like a 3k gold lead at 15 minutes versus your 2.8k, you disgusting shitters.
To be fair, I guess I still were 3k up at 10 minutes and then we dove and then we left. So I'm just saying.
Okay, if we bring the statistic back a bit, then maybe G2 have a shot.
Look at 10 minutes, maybe then we're leading.
But Misfits are again still the early game team, and I still worry that they don't actually have the tools within their team to fix their mid to late game problem. As a result, they're still meta dependent. And even though Origen have had like a really poor start, I still see all of the tools within Origen to fix their issues. Like I think with Cold and Miffy on that team, they know what to do at every stage of the game if they can execute properly. But on Misfits roster, I still don't see that, even though they've had such a strong start. I would expect them to have a strong start in this meta as well. But they have, in the one game that they lost, displayed the exact kind of problems that I feared that they would display. And Gorilla was on Alistair that game.
Grabbz, I've already made an executive decision here, right? As the guest, you don't have to address everything veteran just address.
I forgot what I said. Like,
I know, it's like,
I have no
it's
idea
like one of those memory tests, isn't it? Like, repeat these numbers back to me. 17, 45. It's like, fucking hell, I gave up after 3. I just waited till the end. What was the last one? 7. There you go, 7. Like, but so the point is, either if you made a point that you wanted to address, do it. Otherwise, just give me your thoughts on Misfits.
I agree. Source could be a band-aid for the engage problem if the meta would suit him, but something like Ornn is not playable right now. Ornn is good. Sign could fit, but also Sign's engage is pretty telegraphed. It's not that explosive like what Source wants to do with Java and Ornn, you know. So I definitely see the same point as him there. Also, one thing I want to mention is, again, from hearsay, because I didn't work with him, Hans Summer is not that vocal. Misfits facilitates the lead for bot lane. That means Hans is fed. But if your fed player is not able to lead the game, you're going to have issues automatically. Sure. Because all the money is sitting on him, but he's not able to actually tell the team what he wants to do, right? I could be wrong here. That's just what I heard. And as Bertrand also said, like, yeah, Misfits at some point, I think it was summer. Like, at 20 minutes, they had the lead, and all they could do was go mesh and hope the enemy team 5-6 them and they killed them. And if that didn't happen, they couldn't close the game.
Oh, that was spring. That was last spring. Yeah.
Actually, when they threw all the leads they had. So in that regard, I think there's still the same issues there. I'm also kind of surprised that they did so well though in the early season. I didn't think they're going to be that strong. I actually thought that teams like Schalke and Origen were a bit better, honestly. Because I also think how Misfits plays the game is very telegraphed, with having a player like Source on top and Handsome Gorilla on bot. So as long as you have the tools to actually fight them in a bot lane, I think you should be fine against them most of the time. Unless Maxter does some wacky shit, which he's able to do because he thinks a lot of the game and will find a certain cheese or something, or a pathing that will surprise you. Like, cheese always sounds so negative, right? So he will just find a way to surprise you because he's very creative. Let's say it that way. So yeah, again, I'm also surprised that they were that good. Kind of shot against Vitality that if they don't get the leads, then of course they're kind of lost. And I agree.
They did have a lead in the Vitality game, was my point, actually. They did have the lead in the Vitality game for a significant portion of it. A very big lead as well. They were literally...
actually, I forgot.
I can't tell you exactly in terms of gold, but given that they have one loss on the board and they're still dicking you guys in gold at 15 minutes, you can imagine how big of a lead they blew.
Yeah. Then it must be immense if they are better than us in that regard. But yeah, again, like, I'm worried if they make bot their focal point, and if it's true that Hansama doesn't talk that much, then it will be an issue over the whole season unless Soaz gets the champion, which can just hard engage on you, be in your face, as Petra mentioned, tempo advantage. There will be an issue for sure for them.
That is one of those areas that, it's funny, people have brought this topic up many times, but unfortunately it's usually in the straw man, which is that angle of like, the reason Koreans are the best is they know all the roles in the game, which is like, I'm sure the genius Korean does. Like, basically what you're saying there is geniuses know more than the rest of us, right? I get that. It's not really about being Korean on that angle. Like, there's no universe in which, like, fucking Bang, when he was in SK Telecom, knew every other role. There's just no way. Like, if you just look at the way he plays, it's clearly not the case. But I will say, if you look throughout history, it is actually a real tough spot to be in, what you're describing there, Grabbz, where you have an AD carry who in theory you want to do well in the game, but he himself won't necessarily be able to take part in the shot calling of what happens when he is the guy who has all the resources in him. Because as much as people might dislike some other players in history who've been the very outspoken AD carries, Double Lift, Forgiven, etc., the whole point is those guys have a very set idea in mind of what they want to do when they know they're the one who's got the ball, as it were. And so as much as that might, maybe they'll be over-dominating in some instances, but the good thing is you can actually trust that when they have the lead like that, they might have a sense of what to do next. It's pretty, like, how can you expect, let's say the top lane is the guy doing the most vocal. How the fuck's he supposed to call what the bot lane's supposed to do? He's playing his own side of the map.
I think Schalke will suffer from a similar issue to this when the meta changes, but I think the thing that Schalke has is that both Memento and Ignar have a very strong idea of how to play out this early to mid-transitional period, whereas I think there's only one player on Misfits that has a very strong and consistent idea of how to do that. So I think it will be masked a bit better on Schalke than on Misfits right now. I do still think Misfits will end up as a better team, than Schalke overall, though that's potentially just biased towards star power. I mean, they literally have Febiven and they have Soaz, and their bot lane is insane as well. Like, they should be able to just win off of early leads enough to be above Schalke, I think, when the meta shifts somewhat, and you actually have to be doing pretty well later on in the game, because Memento's always had this issue. Once the game hits a point, he has similar issue that Maxor does. Actually, this might be a really consistent thing when it comes to junglers like that. But he has a similar issue where he doesn't really know the right opportunities to engage, and it sometimes seems a bit panicked and a bit forced, and they'll suffer for that. And if Ignar's not snowballing by 20 minutes, then it defaults to the same Misfits that we saw beforehand when he was on Misfits, where they were just going at Baron and praying that you guys came in and he could get an engage off. So I think they'll also suffer later on, but it's going to be masked earlier.
Who do you think wins in the Fnatic Misfits game next week?
Yeah. I do believe Misfits has a slight advantage there.
Yeah, like it's so difficult to predict Fnatic for anything right now, to be honest.
I'm just saying I would be surprised if Fnatic loses to Rogue, but I would be surprised if they beat Misfits as well. Yeah, I just think they're going to go 1-1 next week.
Okay. Right, let's talk about the Schalke team then, because obviously this is the team where if you were building up the preseason, obviously G2, Fnatic, Misfits, like some people thought Schalke has a good team, but I don't think most people put them in that group. So is this initial start legit, Grabbz? Is this team actually going to be one of the front runners? Is this fool's gold? Like they're just going to cool off? What do you think?
I think they're going to be one of the top 5 teams. I would be surprised if they're not.
So what do they do well then?
I mean, I expected them to do well, yeah. It wasn't a surprise to me. I like upset Ignar and Schalke, of course. Really, really good bot lane. I'm somebody, I really believe in Memento. I think like Memento is actually still underrated. We worked with him as well, I think. At some point.
The problem is, as a jungler in a bad team, you're never going to be able to build your rep, really. Like, what can you do?
Like, he made Rocket work.
Yeah, even when he was on Rocket, it was undeniable to everybody, even your most basic Redditor, that this guy had some of the best early game control in Europe and even in the West. Like, it's always been undeniable. He's been such a strong, intelligent player in the early game, and it's been very consistent. It hasn't relied on like surprises, like you were theorizing Maxtor would have to do. Memento's being always so solid at that point, and Ignar's also being always so solid at that point. So it doesn't surprise me that they are seeming so exceptional in this meta. They've always been really strong players, Memento especially.
And again, as the meta is early game focused right now, alone those 3 players will net them leads.
Oh yeah.
On the top is very stable as well. Like he's not going to get shit on. In most cases, maybe against Wonder. That's for the second game.
You have to plug it.
I mean, I put the guy on Sejuani and Karma, so I have to like kind of give him credit and say, okay, if he would actually play a carry champion, then he would show what he can do.
I mean, he'll at least get pressure on the Karma though every time. I don't know about this. Sejuani versus Sion.
Right.
I believe was the match that you picked Sejuani into, right? Yeah. Is Sejuani supposed to win that? Were you picking that thinking you were getting a winning match?
Yeah, I mean, that's why we picked it.
Okay.
At least from our practice, we had good success in that matchup.
Right.
We just randomly picked it. Like, there was reason behind it.
Yeah, and I won't press too much more on that. I
mean, just watch the game again before we made our goal 5 dive, goal 4 dive against Excel. How much pressure Wanda actually had on top.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think at some point, if you just don't dive, Sion can't lane at some point anymore. Maybe expect a bit worse than other top laners, but get insane pressure on top. Yeah.
Okay. Right, one of the questions I have about the Schalke team is when we've got these mids coming in, and people obviously know about Nemesis and Humanoid, those are the ones with the hype. The one that people know the least about is Abbedagge, the mid laner of Schalke. And
sure.
I saw 3 of the first 4 games, he was just on Lissandra anyway. So it's very hard as someone who didn't watch him when he was a challenger player for me to even know what this guy's level is. Like, who is he supposed to be as a player? So is this some sort of indictment of who he is as a player, veteran, that he's not really being... I mean, it's a good champion, but it's not really something you expect that he's going to take over the game. So what do you expect from him as a mid laner of this team?
I did kind of expect them to put him on a champion like Lissandra, like Galio, like any of these kind of champions where he could play really well with Memento and Ignite as they are coordinating. And that's exactly what they've done. He obviously hasn't shown to be on the level of Humanoid, but I personally never expected that. A lot of people were pointing out Abbedagge's performances in the Turkish league versus Humanoid's performances in the Turkish league, and that only really works if you just purely looked at from like a results base and neglect the fact that Humanoid was carrying like a team that was like 2-8 before he joined it, and still came in just underneath Abbedagge. But I think Abbedagge is in a similar position to what Nemesis should be on right now. It's just that Schalke have figured out their identity so much easier. But if you know anything about these players, it's really obvious the kind of identity you want to have as Team Schalke, and I think Abbedagge is doing everything he can to fit into that. He's never going to be the focal point on a team like this. So if you're expecting Abbedagge to come on and be a carry player because he got rank 1 in EU, which is, by the way, I was kind of surprised that you said that everyone knew Humanoid and Nemesis. I thought Humanoid was the least known, and Abbedagge is quite well known because he got rank 1 randomly, and then he joined Schalke and they really piggybacked off of the whole rank 1 thing. Well, that's not the case. If you're expecting him to be like a solid carry on this team, then this team made a terrible choice in identifying how they most optimally played. I like that he's on the side, and I hope he stays on these kind of champions, because this is the kind of thing Memento and Ignite will play really well off of and really well with.
Okay. What do you actually like? Obviously, name for name, this roster can't match the Misfits roster. But is the actual like balance of the types of players they have and the roles that they're going to play? Is there a more logic to it? Do you think?
Yeah, I think it's. I think this was a roster that was built with a clear direction and focus in mind, or they just got lucky. But this is a much more plug and play roster than the Misfits one would, because like every time we talk about how the Misfits roster has to develop and has to play and the opportunity they have to look for, it's way more complex and complicated than trying to work around the mismatch of players that you have within it. But with Schalke, it's very easy for everyone plain as day to see how they want to play with it, and credit where credit's due. The coaching staff behind them have clearly realized this as well, and I wouldn't expect them to ever be like a top one, or I don't think that they're going to be like a world's contender, by the way. I still think Origen will be a world's contender. I still believe that Fnatic will pull it back. But this isn't a team that's ever going to be a low tier team. It's with players like that I don't understand how they could ever.
Okay. What do you think, Grabbz? Like, I mean, when you look at this team, like based on the games I've saw early on, okay, I always hear the hype from people. Like, everyone's been hyping Upset's potential for the last few years, and obviously there'd be games you saw it, but then there's also plenty of games where he was just a good player. You know, maybe he wasn't in the right team. I don't know. Is this the team where if they do well, Upset is going to be like the best player on the team? He's going to be the MVP candidate type player.
I mean, there's no secret. Upset is the real deal. Like, Upset is really good at this game. There's one thing though, alluding to Veteran's point, which I also read they're not going to go to Worlds, is the reason because the roster is so plug and play, and every team will know how to play the game. So there are two options. Either a team is too bad to punish that individually or whatever, and Schalke will win. But against the good teams, who will actually know, okay, they play to bot, we contest the division there, we draft a certain way that they can't have some advantages, they will struggle a lot.
Yeah,
right.
Because I think the carry power in mid and top is not enough to carry games against the better teams in the league.
Yeah.
So from us example, like we played them in game 2, and then we already knew what's happening, right? We knew Upset will be the focal point. And the moment I think Perkz solo killed him basically with blind W in the bush, I knew the game was over. Like, I knew there's no reason to be afraid anymore. Like, if he falls behind in this roster and Memento is not 5-0 at that point, I think Schalke will have a really hard time winning games.
Yep.
Of course, always with rookie mid laners, there's room to grow. So if they can make Abbedagge carry threat later on, I don't expect it in next weeks, but let's say towards playoffs, and they can actually diversify the playstyle, then of course Schalke suddenly looks like a different team, right? But the way they're looking right now, I think they're just going to struggle against the better half of the teams.
I think it will be a bit difficult to do that, though. I think playing away from Ignar's lane will make Ignar a very uncomfortable player. He's like the opposite of Gorilla in this sense, where I think Gorilla's not necessarily going to be comfortable on engaged champions. I don't necessarily think Ignar will be comfortable on anything but Like, this guy basically only played hook champs for the longest time, and he only diversified that with what are still very hard engaged champions. So the backup that I would say to play towards mid or top, and I honestly think that they should just play towards top side instead. This is what Splyce did when they had OllieJ, and they weren't winning games playing strong bot lanes like Caitlyn, Zillion, and all this stuff. What they did was they diversified that into playing Camille top, for example, and escorting OllieJ throughout the early game, playing really hard to top side. And I think that should be a strong backup plan for them. But then Ignor's going to be in a very uncomfortable position. You're going to see stuff like what happened to him on it was BBQ he was on last split, right? I'm very sure it was BBQ, but
he was.
Yes,
yeah,
it was.
yeah, you're going to see issues, the same kind of issues that they had there, where basically they can't play towards Ignor. It becomes a bit more of a liability. So I'm not sure that they have this backup plan unlocked for them. So they do kind of need to play towards mid, like Grabbz says, and they need to play bot to mid with that, though. It's a big deal there. Like, I still think, I don't think there's any scenario where you can just safely ignore bot lane. You at the very least have to unlock Ignor.
Fair point, yeah.
Right, if we talk now about, obviously, one of the world's teams, Vitality, this is a team where I have to say, this is why early in the season you've always got to look at the strength of someone's schedule when you're like hyping up the record they have, you know? Like, I've mentioned this a million times before, but I used to get so triggered in the early days of the LCS where, like, you know, you would play the top two teams and go 0-2, then the next week you play the Bombs, and then on the desk they're like, they bounce back with a 2-0 win. It's like, they haven't, they just played the bad teams, you morons. You don't understand the game. What are you talking about? Like, they weren't playing the same team 4 times, were they? So anyway, the reason I'm saying this is because I know coming in with all these other teams bringing in big free agents and upgrades for positions and blockbuster trades, Vitality is one of the teams that seem to get left behind in the mix because a lot of people obviously don't particularly know Mowgli that well. They looked at Vitality and thought, well, maybe they only made Worlds because the league was weak last split. But they've got their first few weeks, including the upcoming weeks, is one of the hardest schedules you will have in the entire LCS. They have LEC rather. They have a very, very hard schedule. They've already played, obviously, against Schalke, which was their loss. They've played against Splyce, who they beat. Then they've played Fnatic, they've beaten, and they've beaten Misfits. And then they're going to play like G2 in 2 weeks. They're playing against OG next week. So they've got a very tough schedule. So the 3-1 for them. Is this going to be a very good team? Grabbz, you go first on this one. What do you think? Vitality, will they be good?
I think they have the same identity as last year. They can beat every team in a best of 1. I just think when it comes to best of 5s, they're going to struggle. Given the fact that they're super aggressive all the time. That means you can surprise people off. For example, their Splyce one was not convincing at all. I think if Xerxes doesn't lose his mind and doesn't engage there on Vayne, where he almost gets one shot, Splyce is a good shot of bringing the game as well. And also it's hard for me to see sure, people now see the World's run of Vitality and they're super hyped because they beat RNG in the best of 1. But I don't see that much progress in that team over the time to say that they're a top team. Like, they will always be able to beat anybody. They can beat us as well. That's just how Vitality is as a team. But if you look at the macro game, I think, what game was it? I think it was even the first game. Their macro against Schalke was 25 minutes. We have no idea how to win the game. Go Nash 5 times in a row and hope it works at some point. That was the macro.
Yeah.
And it was the same thing last bit as well. So, sounds harsh, but I didn't see the progress there at least. And that's something you expect to happen if you go to Worlds and have a bootcamp there and just stick together as a team, right? Because then at some point you don't have to work on communication anymore. So they're a strong team by merit of their aggressiveness, but I don't think they're going to be on pair with... actually, Misfits maybe is too slow. And in a sense that if they don't get the bot lane lead, they can't win. So that'd be a good matchup for them, traditionally. But yeah, I wouldn't put them in, it's summer. I wouldn't put them at Worlds.
To be fair, though, maybe what happened was Yamato kind of was like, listen, we were an upset team last year, but, we've got to take it up to the next level. If you want to be considered a great team, you've got to actually challenge for the LCS title. We've got to work on, macro concepts. We've got to stop all this cheese. And then what happened is one of the players turned to him and said, no, coach, because that's what a Korean team would do, you see. What we should do is play our own way and be ourselves and believe that we can win every game. And since we believe we can win every game, maybe we can. And then actually that speech was so rousing that Yamato kind of, one tear came down his face. this. He started applauding, and they just said, I love this big dick energy in this room, and they walked out. And then the Vitality guy just cut him a check for $10,000, said, well done, great coaching session this month. So, whatever, that was just for you there, Veteran. I know you're a hater. So, come on, what do you think about the Vitality team?
That fucking speech.
It's all right, all fun on this show. I'm sure he'll come on at some point. Come on, Veteran, what do you think of the Vitality squad?
Yes. So the reason that they got left behind is that everybody correctly interpreted the Mowgli change as potentially a downgrade. Like, I don't really understand why the Mowgli change ever had to happen in the first place. Kikis gave them exactly what they needed. They had far more direction at a point in the game that Grabbz just correctly identified. They, again, have no direction in anymore. And outside of that, Vitality were a team that got every advantage at level 2 and just snowballed that advantage along as hard as they could. They level 2'd mid, and then they would level 6 bot with somebody, it was like a Rise ult or something like this. And they did this every game, and that was how they got their leads. They're always level 2 and level 6. They always made these plays, snowballed that as hard as they could. This is the only identity that they had until Kickers was brought along. And when Kickers was brought along, they were a lot more consistent at later stages of the game. This is not a team that has ever developed outside of a roster change, basically. And it's not a team that has developed too much display either, and in fact has reverted to some of their old issues. But without these strats that Skilly used to give them, Mowgli isn't the early game jungler. He's not the same at all. So the Mowgli change in mind is what I'm playing now. I think Jizuke is literally stealing Elo from Fnatic on their behalf, and his performance, at the very least, I don't think that he like solo carried their game versus Misfits or anything like this. Like I've been reading, I think what happened in the Misfits game was that Misfits didn't know what on earth they were doing, whereas Vitality always have a go button that they will press perpetually, and they pressed that even though they had no tempo. And because Misfits don't really know what they're doing at that stage of the game, it worked out. But Jizuke definitely stole Elo from them in the Fnatic game, and he was able to output a lot of damage off of his early advantage when they did start pressing the go button Misfits game. So I think that mostly explains why they were able to come back, but it also explains why that doesn't mean that I'm going to consider them to be like a top contender for the World Championships right now, because they've regressed, if any. But I don't believe they'll ever be a low tier team if they still have players like Jizuke on their roster.
I want to mention something, because we talk about Jizuke and Attila all the time. Yes. Karboshad is a goddamn rock on top lane. Just to bring out that Karboshad is really good.
Yeah, he's overlooked in the World's Run for sure, actually.
It's because, to be fair though, it's such an identity change. Like, I know everyone still expects it's like season 5 Gambit, and he's just going to like carry from the top lane. So like that Karboshad hasn't been seen for a while. So who is he in this lineup then, Grabbz? That presumably impresses you to some degree.
It just his consistency. Like, this guy, you know what to expect, and he will be a strong player no matter what. I mean, that's how he developed at some point. I mean, Gambit, he was crazy, yeah, but I think at least also from practice and whatever. Also last year, especially talking about practice, he performed consistently and good. And I just think, yeah, sure, Jizuke and Attila are flashy, but he pulls more weight, I think, especially in the season. So I just wanted to bring it out that people should look more at Karboshad as well.
I think it means that because given that Karboshad is a rock, they just need Jizuke to have a good game, and then they have everything that they need to win, because Karboshad is being such a rock, or Attila can pop off in the bot lane. That always struck me as kind of strange. If you're going to replace anyone on that roster, I don't know why you replaced the jungler. I think you replaced the support. If you replace any, so I'm really interested to know, because I can only imagine it's an internal issue that they decided they needed Mowgli. I'm actually really interested to know at some point why they opted to make this change.
For me though, you mentioned that with Kikis they had an identity and they're almost stable, but if you look at Kikis now as well, Kikis is very one-dimensional in how he sees the game as a jungler. Mm-hmm. He didn't change it all from Vitality, and he kind of wants Rogue to play the same way. Yeah. With players that can't pull off the same style. He still goes for those crazy level 2 ganks and tries to get advantages early game, not looking at tempo, right? Mm-hmm. So maybe that's something they identified that show in a best of 1 setting against equal teams, a bit worse teams, is one of them advantages. But if they want to develop as a team, maybe they thought in Mowgli they have a player who is a bit more stable, has a different view on the game, and can then be more impactful later on, even without leads, because I think that's what Mikyx is missing. I think Mikyx was hit or miss. Sure, he had the miracle run where he was ahead every single game. Merit to him, like he did well there. But on a long basis, on a whole year, if you have a player who relies on that much, I think it makes sense in that regard that they change him out. At least from what he's shown in Rogue right now, because he's still the same player, doing the same things.
But what I wanted to ask you about now, both of you, is I've noticed, unfortunately, it feels like Jizuke has been a victim of Vitality's success because of the way that they had success over the 2 splits last year. Like the first split was the one where it was just the ardent sensor meta, and everyone was like, well, how can we even tell if they're any good? All they do is just do well for 20 minutes and then win the game. It's like people were doing that. So the problem is because they had so many rookies, they never got the credit in that sense. Then you go, well, they weren't technically rookies, but you know what I mean? They were newer players. Then you go over to the summer split, and obviously the only reason that they were even in a position to go to Worlds is because they had this run where they changed up the junglers, and then a lot of the focus was placed upon those players because people love to do that logic of like, last one in must be the one that changed everything, even though it doesn't make a lot of sense in any team game. So I've noticed that no matter, even when Vitality has done well, Jizuke has never been able to actually earn the status of like, could he be the best mid laner in Europe? Is he contending with Caps and Perkz for that status? You know, those players always retained that status, whereas a lot of people, for some reason, attached him to the team and were like, oh, well, Vitality was just good for a short while, now they're not good. Where does Jizuke fit in the mix in that sense, veteran? Like, if you had to give like a ranking or a tier list, whereabouts would he be in your mid list for Europe, LEC?
Well, he definitely has the issue of not being Caps and not being Perkz.
That is tough. That's a lot of people have that problem nowadays. Yeah.
Like, I think that would be the only reason why people were not identifying him as like a clear standout number 1 or something like this. But I do think there was a lot of hype around Jizuke, particularly in their initial spring split run. Even though Vitality really turned off in the second half, and I honestly thought Sheriff was going to end up winning it. He still won by a pretty significant. So I think there is a lot of hype carried by it, and I do still think that I'd have to place him. If I do a straight up ranking, I definitely place him below Caps based on what I see right now. But it's really difficult to do the rest of the rankings. I'd like to put Featherven higher up, but their Misfits 1 loss right now does make it look quite shaky, whereas Jizuke performed really well on a pretty bad matchup in the Aurelia versus Galio game. Like he stole Elo for them in that matchup. So at this point, I guess I put Jizuke and Featherven as contenders for second place there, and I want to be able to say that Humanoid is contesting. He's literally only had 4 games in his entire career though at this point at the LEC level, so it's pretty difficult to say whether or not he's up. But I do believe if anyone's going to be like the new Jizuke in terms of standout rookie of the split mid laner, this guy's putting these guys on his back, it's going to be Humanoid if it's any of these rookies. Particularly based on even just the game 1 performance. He didn't even die in his first game. The rest of his team was monster behind it, just put them all on his back and got them. There's something about Eastern Europeans, though. These guys are never intimidated when they go on stage, at least not in my experience. And they always just perform their job what they possibly can. Has diversified so much in the last few years that I'd expect this kind of performance from.
Okay. What do you think, Grabbz? Thoughts on Jizuke? Where does he fit?
It's hard to say. I think he's like a definition of a day-by-day player. Like, it really depends. He has really high highs, but his lows also appear often where it just backfires, right? Mm-hmm. It felt for a long time he only knows one direction, and this is forward. And he plays giga aggressive, which worked out with players like Mikyx and Gilius, right? Because they have the same mindset. So you have 2 players who happily run into a chainsaw if they have to, but they're still doing the same thing, right? And it worked out for them. And then he's hyped and it didn't work out, and he's 0-5, and everybody's like, okay, Jizuke, what's going on? So for me, just to consider him a top tier mid laner, I mean, of course, Caps and Perkz are Caps and Perkz. They're just still this consistency. That also in a bad game, he's not going to run it down, and he's going to be impactful later on, which kind of improved a bit from the beginning, but I still think there are some issues there. So I think it's good, but he can't shout all the time.
Because I'm kind of with... keep going, finish.
Especially with Mowgli, I think there will be some troublesome games where he wants to be aggressive, but he doesn't get the same support like he used to.
Yeah.
So that might backfire as well and make him look bad. But if he can adapt, of course, I mean, Jizuke is a good player. Nobody can doubt that. So.
Because, yeah, that's the thing. For me, like, these two storylines clearly connect together. Because the other thing is, when I used to watch the Freaks team that Mowgli played for, first of all, it was a rotation in that team. He wasn't always in the lineup. It was between him and Spirit how they used him, depending on what they wanted out of the jungler. And if you remember that team, it was obviously the team that famously had Kuro as the mid laner, right? Kuro and Jizuke are complete contrast. Yep. Like, these are not in any way the same player. So as a result, it just the culture shock of what the player is going to do versus what your expectations of what your mid laner will do is going to be so night and day. That's already going to be tough for a Korean player. And then you add in, obviously, when you have a Korean player, I've always said this, whenever people in public, right, do that thing where a Korean player joins their team, so within the first 3 weeks, they go out of their way to post like, wow, his English is really good, which means he can say anything. Like, he didn't just sit in silence. Like, it's usually like the opposite. They're just trying to say his English isn't bad. Well, the problem with that is, as you say, in this particular team, the junglers have pretty much defined the team. If you look at all 3 of the junglers they've had. So it's definitely, like, it's one of those ones where if it works out, I'll give massive props to the Vitality organization if they knew something we don't know. But from the outside, it doesn't really look like a move that has, like, I can't really see what the logic behind it is. Like, even if they were going on the logic of let's get the best player available at this position, is that the best one that you had a possibility for? Feels like even taking, like, you know, a talented rookie would have been a better choice if they were from Europe.
Yeah.
Just seems a bit of a bizarre direction to go with, especially because you had an all-European team. Thought, you know, that was his stick almost.
Yeah, that plus I don't understand the urge to replace kickers. So this is why I conclude something must have occurred internally that we're not privy to. And I'd very much like an answer to that at some point. I think many people are interested in answers to that at some point.
To be fair, Veteran, even though I do agree in that particular incident, it does deserve like some sort of investigation to find out what happened. That is also the story of Kikis' career. He comes into a team, people are like, oh, Kikis, isn't he that guy who's been on like 50 teams? And then he's like, oh yeah, check out my fucking honeymoon period. And then he goes for the first 2-3 weeks, he's popping off, it's looking great. Everyone's like, I thought he was just an idiot who made all these moves, but they're all working, so he must be a genius. Then he hits like that, you know, the clock strikes 12, ding, ding, sorry Cinderella, and he's like, oh no, shit, they're all finding me out, no, and then gets kicked again as usual, and everyone's like, suddenly the collective spell just falls away, and everyone goes, actually, yeah, let's just get a different jungler in. To be fair, the same thing happens to Gilius as well, except he gets replaced by Kikis. That's obviously the like cycle of life in Europe. That's the ecosystem in Europe, you know, the big fish eats the little fish.
So when Inspired replaces Kikis on Rogue Academy, you know Kikis is death for Turkish League now.
Exactly.
It's all set in the stars.
And to be fair, if you want to have really good early game, if you've just played for every other team in Europe, you can have a really nice idea of how they want to play. So it actually all works. All the narratives work together very neatly for the tapestry of Kikis. Right, okay, the team that I want to talk about now, which I never would expect you were talking about as I'm going down the rankings, is going to be Splyce. Because when I saw this lineup in the offseason, right, okay, true, I don't know Humanoid very well, so I didn't really know what to expect there. Like, Fizzichachi, yeah, he's a good player, but clearly he's clearly got limitations to his own playing style that he self-imposes. And then some of the others, I'd consider some of them like below average players in the EU LCS. No scaring, maybe give him a little bit of credit because he often gets a lot of hype. What do you think of this Splyce lineup, Grabbz? Seems kind of surprising that they started so strong.
Somewhat. For me, Splyce always was this fine team. That was fine. They're never really threatening for the top teams, but they're good enough to consistently beat the bad teams. Now, of course, with Humanoid and especially Northgaren, I think Northgaren is an upgrade to Kasing, which will help Kobe transition into the later stage of the game because Kobe, of course, feels better and it feels like it's 3-4 items. That will help them a lot. And so yeah, I mean, I can't judge Humanoid that much. We didn't play them that many times. So only from seeing, he seems very good. But that could also be Honeymoon. And I mean, Honeymoon is a meme, but it's true. Like, I can tell you from many teams I had, Honeymoon is a real thing.
Sure.
A very real thing. So it's hard for me to judge, especially also, I'm not so sold on Xerxes anymore. He also halted in his development, like he had really good start and then suddenly he struggled a lot, especially if he didn't have Zach anymore. And Splyce itself still, also since they retain the coaching staff, they're decent in macro, they know how to move, but they're slow. And in this fast meta, this can bite them really hard. Judging from their, against Vitality, for example, they could have won. I think they should have won if Schalke doesn't engage there. I'm checking your drafts again, sorry. So yeah, Kate Morgana, and they had Xavier Braum. Let's see. Actually, that Lucian against Rogue, but Rogue games don't count really at this point, do they?
Not really.
So yeah, for me, they always had the identity of being a slow team, which is not beneficial in this current meta. They're very decent in macro. I think since the coaching staff retained, basically they will be the same team in that regard. The top laners are 1-for-1 so for me. Chachi, Odo are very similar in my opinion from a skill level here. So yeah, I think the biggest change was Humanoid, of course, and then but Noskaren, I think, will impact a lot more since he's better than Kasing, and therefore Splyce will have an easier time going into the rest of the game. So I think they're gonna be a playoff contender for sure. I would say they're more consistent, for example, Vitality. So I wouldn't be surprised if by the end of the year, Splyce is higher up than them, for example. But I wouldn't expect too many wonders from them.
My personal thoughts on Splyce is I'm actually quite impressed by how Xerxes has been playing these early games out. They've actually been doing stuff early on, as opposed to beforehand, where Xerxes was essentially playing nurse to as many lanes that were losing priority as possible, and basically playing early game all wrong compared to how you would ideally want to play it as a team and pushing advantages. But now even on Nocturne, he was being aggressive early on to make sure that they had very good windows from level 6 onwards to make plays of his champion. Like the level 2 gank that he did for Humanoid really fundamentally changed that game. When you had to burn his summoners immediately and got a bad back timing off of that. And Humanoid, in this instance, being Nocturne, you could play with the fake press, still play towards top side on his lane. And in a situation that with no other jungler you'd actually be able to do in safety, and was actually able to take control of that side for the subsequent invade that they would pull off. So Humanoid was able to push that through about as well as any mid laner would be able to push that through, even with some nuances that I wouldn't even expect from some of the better mids in Europe. But Xerxes set that up for them, which is different to how Splyce were previously playing. So I'm actually kind of impressed with how they are right now. I still don't. I think that this is a team that has the potential to play spoiler. One of the issues that you have is that bot lane. I agree that Noskaren is better than Kasing, and it's a huge upgrade. I think that they have down there, but he was never like the most vocal in any way. So you're going to have some form of communication issue down there, and you're not going to be able to play with Noskaren's aggression as you ideally would like to do, and this puts a lot on the mid jungle to make the improvements that they have been making. But I do think that if this team figures out their communication structure, they can actually play spoiler. And I mean play spoiler going all the way to the World Championships kind of deal. This is a team that has a very high ceiling with the players that they have. Vizicachi actually comes out looking like Vizicachi and Carbegas actually come out looking like the worst aspects of the team in this case. And that's not to say that they're even bad players. It's just that they actually have a lot of talent on that roster right now. So I have very high hopes for them if they continue the progress that they've been making. I saw you shaking your head a little though, Grabbz, so...
I mean, maybe you can judge him out better than me. Maybe he's more insane than I think, but I don't think they're that strong individually. And that's a sad. I mean, you lagged out. I'm just worried that they're too slow in regard. Even if Xerxes plays a bit more aggressive in the early game, they traditionally are a slow team, and in the current meta it will not work. But also there are some aspects that I can't talk about right now, since we play them next week. So maybe that's why the things I see cloud my judgment there maybe a bit.
Okay, what about this then, veteran? Since next week they play G2 and they play Schalke, are they going to beat Schalke?
I think they can beat Schalke. Yeah, I think Schalke is actually the kind of team that this team can play very well into. I think the mid matchup is going to be a big part of that, and I think you can pick the Snazore you want. But if Splyce are the kind of team that actually have the ability to plan around that, deny you that mid jungle pressure, and then at different later points in the game, actually pull a trigger in a way that Schalke back behind. And currently, they've only really been playing games that they've been like snowballing and winning. This isn't a team that I expect to do that well playing from behind. And I think Splyce actually have the versatility to beat them. And I think G2 is shit. So obviously, Splyce are going to roll over them. They're not going to beat G2, by the way. G2 are even more able to. I think they're even more diverse than Splyce are right now, largely in part due to the top lane difference, and also because we don't know the ceiling on Perkz yet. But we can assume it's very high just from what we've seen and just from seeing his progress as a mid laner already, and also by the fact that they have Mikyx in bot lane. If Norskeven is coming in to be the new anything, it's the new Mikyx, but Mikyx is still an incredibly strong mechanical force as a support player, and Norskeven isn't quite at that level yet. So I do think the bot lane will mismatch in that sense. I think Mikyx is very. You guys clearly have one of the most mechanical teams in the game. So you have all for you, and you're on a really strong start. So I expect you guys to win that. Did I lag out during that?
We heard most of it. I think we got most of the gist of it.
How do you know you heard most of it?
Because I can tell that you couldn't have put 7 extra words in a sentence and made it make sense. just
to be fair, we're talking about veteran here. If somebody can put off, it's him.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, luckily, we could actually miss a whole section and then we'd get 3 extra sections that were relevant, but just were additional parts in the conversation. So,
G2 will win. They have a higher ceiling than Splyce do, but Splyce can actually strategically beat Schalke. They have all the tools to do it. TLDR.
Okay. Right. What about this then? So we'll go through some of the other teams quicker because we're getting towards the bottom end of the table. But one thing I'm very intrigued by has obviously got to be veteran, the SK Gaming team, because on the one hand, a lot of people, if they just look individually at this roster, and especially in terms of name value, it looks shit. But the aspect that people had to hype it was this angle of, yes, but they've got some of the Mad Lions players, so maybe they can have like pre-existing synergy. Maybe this will actually be like, because people don't know the scene below LCS, like actually they can be better than we expect. I can see you lagged out right now, but whatever. I'll just say most of this again. Are you actually still there, veteran?
I am actually.
Right, okay, you could still hear it, right? Okay, so what do you think of the SK Gaming team? I mean, they also had a pretty rough initial schedule, but have gotten some solid wins, obviously beating Fnatic, so what do you think?
So I've alluded to this before. I actually think that teams that retain most of their roster in the manner that SK have done are able to get really good strong starts to a split. So see their old Vitality roster. The big thing that SK Gaming retained, though, was with Selfmade Man. And Selfmade Man obviously individually has shown himself to be a very strong jungler. I think 3 out of 4 games he had incredibly strong early game pathing, and then there was one game, I believe it was on Nocturne, where I didn't quite agree with the choices that he made. But outside of that, he, as actually being like a very strong in-game leader, is particularly in the early aspects of the game for the old Mad Lions squad, where they've been taking 3 out of 5 of the players for. I think Crownshot has kind of gone to the wayside in when people are lavishing praise upon elements of SK. I think Crownshot's actually been performing incredibly well for a rookie bot laner, and especially given that his support is Dreams, who isn't technically a rookie. He was on the Mysterious Monkeys lineup, but he was far from like the strongest outside of LCS support that you could have taken. But Crownshot has really been showing up, and I think with that, with how exceptionally well Selfmade's been controlling the early game, and with the fact that Pyrion doesn't have to take command of communication in that mid-jungle for the mid-jungle synergy, because Selfmade's doing all of this, and Pyrion's champ pool is obviously being something that Selfmade can play off of really easily. I think they had all of the tools to have a really strong start to the split. And obviously everyone beats Fnatic now, so you can't really look at that and be like, oh wow, it's insane. They came in and beat the world fine. Oh, those guys, okay. But they have shown, particularly in the XL matchup, that they are a cut above the rest of the lower tier teams. I still expect them to finish as a lower tier team, but I also expected them to kind of have a strong start. Maybe at best you were looking at them being the Giants of this split, such that Giants were doing so well that at one point we thought the finals were going to be Vitality versus Giants in Spring Split last year. But But yeah, I think all praise to Selfmade and Crownshot for the performances that they have shown coming in, and the confidence that they have shown coming in. It's being a very decisive team, given that these guys are all essentially new to the LEC.
Right, in the context, Grabbz, that obviously this is literally the next team that G2 plays. I understand you can't necessarily give everything away, but can we have some thoughts on the SK Gaming team?
I just want to see them what happens if Selfmade Man doesn't get a good matchup for himself, because currently they kind of pick jungle. And the one time he blind picked was Sejuani with, I think, 3 jungle bans. So I agree here, he played really well, besides one game. And even then, he wasn't terrible, right? But I think, actually, with Veteran, they just take their preseason synergy and their confidence as well. I mean, with Mad Lions, they won everything they can win, and therefore the players don't doubt themselves. They don't care about LEC, you know? No player who won on Challenger or something will care about who in the LEC is playing, because they only know winning. That's how they play, right? But I think if they get put in a position where Selfmade Man can't control the pace of the game, they're going to have huge issues.
Yeah, it may even be not necessarily that he needs to counterpick in the jungle, but that he needs an early game aggressive jungler, because his Nocturne pathing was very questionable. That's not a path that you could take in that particular matchup, and that wasn't his counterpick matchup. So it might be that he's just really strong in these early game control junglers, which would fit everything we know about him, in a similar vein to how it would fit like Memento, for example. But there are definitely going to be more holes that will show and more cracks that will form. I do think I do have to praise Crownshot for his exceptional play in the first few weeks. This guy hasn't been phased by any of the bot lanes that he's come up against. In the first bot lane he came up against was Reckless Hylissang. So commiserations to that. Even if he obviously won everything. Twice, yes. Lest we forget, he beat them twice in lane. There you go.
Right, being as I alluded with the Vitality lineup of how strong their strength and schedule is, I have to make the same caveat when we talk about Origen, because even though they are a team that is 1-3, which never's going to look good if people hype you as a team that's going to be very good, they did obviously play G2, Fnatic, Misfits. The worst opponent on paper they played was Splyce, and as we just alluded to, Splyce actually has turned out to be pretty good in the first few weeks. So is it worrying that our Origen is 1-3? Is this actually indicative of anything?
They will bounce back, I think. Yeah. I mean, I've said like 5 times already that I think they have all the tools on their roster to bounce back. The thing about Origen and the way that they've been losing games is that they've been caught out doing lazy transitions, but the transition that they want to do and the play that they want to make is the right idea. Just the execution itself isn't particularly there right now. So watching them, I don't watch them and think, this team isn't at all like I thought it would be. I watch them and I think that this team has a couple of rough edges that they need to iron out, and then they will be like an exceptionally strong team. And like you say, their schedule has been pretty rough right now. So if any team were going to abuse these specific instances, it's absolutely the teams that they've already been facing up against. And I do expect things to go up and up from here, and I do still expect these guys to be a top 3 contending team.
All I can say is that when the schedule came out, we're not happy facing them in the first week, just because we're a team of high expectations of Origen. Still have them, and as you said, I mean, a team with Miffy, people still mean Miffy about this. I mean, he got caught out, he died alone too much as well, but he still is very smart about the game. So a team with him in the roster will know how to move in the mid-late game, especially, where it's very important, right? Mm-hmm. They have a strong coaching staff, they have strong individual players. So I don't see a world where they don't bounce back. Like I think Cold is still a bit, I don't want to say isolated, but a bit lost sometimes, especially against us. He felt a bit on a different page. So he's not giving the pressure he should be, especially like thinking Snazore, I think like 3 games. Let me check again before I say something that's not true. Yeah, Xerxes in 3 games, which is supposed to bring the early pressure that even Galio, and he's failing to kind of bring the pressure into the game right now. But it's also something that can't just lie behind communication issues, which are ironed out in 2 weeks or something. So I still think Origen will be a very strong team.
Yeah, I also want to say that while Miffy definitely gives them mid to late game strategy, Cold definitely gives them early to mid game as well. So this is a team that has a very clear handoff point in their communication structure and a very clear communication structure in general when I look at it. And this is the exact same structure that Miffy had on the old Origen as well. Where Miffy would definitely be taking over comms the later that the game went, but Amazing had a lot of impact in the early game in comms, and I can speak to that from experience.
Right. There's obviously only 2 teams left, so we'll go through these ones fairly quickly, just for the sake on the first episode of addressing every team in Europe. So the XL team is, to be fair, one of the late announcements to the league anyway. They've gone with this whole meme of getting a bunch of UK players as well within the context of the lineup, and they're not exactly a lineup anyone looked at and said, this is a fucking sick lineup, I can't wait for this. It's a very bizarre sort of mixture of players. So what do you actually think of XL? Unless you got, they're a lineup where I don't even think it's usually that funny to flame teams like that. It's just when did you expect them to be good? So are there any bright spots that could mean they have any potential with the strength of the league?
It's hard to say, but I can't put my finger on why, but I think they're not as bad as people think. And I think they can also play spoiler on a good day. Because right now, how it looks like, they have a decent grasp of the early game in most cases, and then at some point they're lost, which is usually a sign of a team which has to learn still and is new, right? But they already have, at least from our experience, a good grasp of how they want to play the game, and they're on the same page is something that, even if they lack individual talent compared to other teams, will help them out in certain games. So I think they can beat those, for sure, lower teams and the middle of the pack teams as well, if they're not careful enough, like we were. So yeah, I can't, but there's no one point I can direct you to. It's just I think they play as a team, which is very impressive for a team which is thrown together on a short notice, right? So that's impressive for me, and I think they capped at some point just by what material they have as players. But they for sure will not be like a 216 H2K or something.
Well, on that note, though, veteran, the guy who obviously, unfortunately, this is where narratives will just they're so hard to kill. Cadril gets all the flame on this team, veteran.
Yeah, which is the thing, because if I point to something specific where I can say I know where their strategy is coming from, it's definitely coming from Cadril. Cadril dominates comms like no one else. He's even stronger on early game communication than Memento is. And when both Memento and Cadril were together on Schalke, Cadril was still.
Run that back again. What were you saying? When Cadril was in Schalke,
so
with Memento, he even then had sort of he was the one who spoke more in the comms.
Yeah, I wouldn't say he spoke more, but he was the only person other than Memento who was speaking early game. And then as the game got later, Smitty would take over the comms for mid to late game. That was basically how the structure was. And then when he came back on H2K, he was doing all the comms from jungle. All early game strategy was his. And obviously we went through a lot of other external roster changes due to people getting sick. Even I got sick at one point. Shook played every role in the game almost at one point. It got absolutely ridiculous. The second half of the split there was probably one of the worst things I've ever had to go through. It was still winning his early matchups as junglers in Europe. And I know when I look at that, once he's leading them through that early part of the game as well. And I know that Casual can do a lot for the late game, but how it was working on H2K and how it did work on Schalke is that Smitty was taking that over more and more at that point. He was very decisive on a lot of things, and Casual would micromanage a bit less and less as the game went on after laning phase. I do think that they are somewhat gated in that sense. I don't know how Expects English is, actually. I've never heard anything about it. I do know that he did take some shot calling position at G2 at some point, though, so I assume it's at least good enough to do that sort of thing. And I'm not sure if I would say that they are completely directionless at that point. I just think the execution was off, particularly in the G2 game. No one expects Akali to go literally 1v4 at some point. At that point, it's not the call that is bad. At that point, it's the execution that is bad. If you're killing literally everybody on the enemy team except this one fucking guy who just won't fucking die, no matter what you do. So I kind of disagree in that sense. But they're also that's one of the only games where they've had an early advantage and they've had the opportunity to push it through. And I think because of the level of talent that is on that team, unfortunately, they're not going to get many opportunities to be able to do so.
What I mean, though, when I say they're on the same page, I don't necessarily mean they have a good early game. But as you know, as a coach, there are small movements to do if you know where your jungler is, for example. Because in Europe, still people trade if your jungler is topside, right? And just trade on you. And that's something that Excel does less than other teams, and they're like more controlled. And at least I can see that they have certain concepts, and that the person understood them and want to play with. And this, as a lower end tier team, mechanical and individual wise, will help them a lot. And I think this will let them lead them to wins against teams which are similar to skill level and maybe above as well.
Just to close the episode, just give us some very brief thoughts on Rogue.
On Rogue? Oh god, it's diabolical. It's completely lost. I know that roster, the way it was put together, it didn't seem like it was going to be exceptionally strong. And Senkux deserves better. Senkux had some really standout performances in Misfits. He has clearly got the potential to be a better mid laner than he has been on a consistent basis, at the very least. But even then, when his champion was in meta, he was a very strong point on some of his teams. I think him and Kikis both kind of deserve more. I just wonder at what point Rogue Academy is just going to come up and replace Rogue LEC at this point, because their Academy team is a ridiculously good roster. Like, if you're going to take any sort of rookie top and rookie mid performances in the Polish scene, and Woolite Vander is honestly a better bot lane than Wadid and Hiku. So I think you could literally just transplant Rogue Academy and make it Rogue LCS, and they would look much stronger right now. I think they would have a stronger season with that as well.
Yeah, just to throw in there for my boy Wadid, all you need to know about the bot lane is if you watch the solo kill we did against them, where Lucian gets a trade in, Wadid goes in and Hiku just runs away in a counter matchup.
I mean, they're diamond buddies in the bot lane. They're like we can throw a lot of shade on Hiku, but Wadid's not exactly a player. Okay, you got Mikyx for a reason. How about this? I don't think you are going to complain about taking Mikyx over Wad.
No, I'm not. But okay, on a serious note about Rogue, to finish this off, is that the main issue is they have a jungler whose playstyle is not supported by his laners. Therefore, they lack an identity, they lack any way to accelerate the game. That means even if Kikis gets advantages, it will be hard for this team to actually snowball on that, just because there's a different mindset from jungle to laners. We can argue about laner strength itself. I think also Senkux is fine, Prophet should be fine. The bot is a bit iffy. So yeah, just there's no way this team can function on a player level. And I mean, it was evident from the moment the roster was announced that they're gonna have issues, I feel like.
This video was kindly supported by Dean Tanglis, Andreas Snazore Westerlund, Gardner Wilson, OllieJ, Tobias Bernasconi, NateDOhDoubleG, James Harding, Kyla Harris, Travis Greb, Daniel Yordanov, Tristan Jones, and a special thanks goes out to Jerky's Minion. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for upcoming content of mine? Perhaps you'd like to ask me a question for my monthly video AMA. Do you want some teasers to see who the next guests are for my talk shows, for my interviews? Maybe you'd like to take part in a monthly esports discussion with yours truly. Well, put your money where your mouth is at the Patreon link in the description box below and join the Scrilluminati today.